we've got to reinvent what it means to be a human being alive today. And we've got to invent new societies and it's formidably difficult. But but we haven't even got a hope in hell's chance unless we pay attention to these different fundamental skill sets that we're talking about, and what whole intelligence summarizes and encapsulates in a easy to grasp framework of understanding, so that experimenting, self-recognizing, relating together, acknowledging the embodied nature, our feelings and our emotions inevitably come in. All of this is necessary if we're to relate together sensibly and amicably and respond to the incredible demands and challenges of our time. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Malcolm. Good to see you again.
And you.
Yeah, and I'm pleased we're back on having a chat after the really interesting conversation we had last time, and I'm sort of interested where this one might go. What thoughts do you have?
Well, a lot of the time, I think about the fact that the state of the world is in dire, and in a way, there has to be, if we are to survive as a species, we have to upgrade. We have to become a higher performing species. We have to act intelligently to save our species from extinction. I mean, it sounds crazy at one level, but it's actually, when you look at the rate of melting of the Antarctic ice, and you look at the other things, you realize that there's huge changes going to take place, which are climate driven. And with those will come political problems, there'll become competition for resources, so that we're entering a time of extraordinary challenge and uncertainty. And at the same time, and it's always worth remembering this, people go on, they have children, they have lives, they live in family groups, they live in houses and so on, and there's everything is it's immediate. The world is immediate. It's right around us all the time. And then the other thing, of course, I'm conscious of is the presence of war, and the incredible destructiveness and cruelty and violence and stupidity of war. The fact that people who disagree, narcissistic leaders and people whipping up hatred of others and so on, they're crazy.
Yeah.
They're not intelligent. They don't act intelligently. They don't act certainly with whole intelligence.
That's fascinating. So there's the sort of existential threat that's surrounding us. We're all, well, I would say many, if not most of us, are aware of. And I do accept that the existential threat is different depending on where you are, because eating today might be an existential threat for somebody, mightn't it? Versus us looking at what's happening to the planet, and also what feels like an increased threat of war. And also, the other thing that comes to my mind when you're talking in those terms is that the recognition that as a species, our adult human development actually is, in some senses, advancing. So we are becoming more aware of ourselves and the impact we're having, and thinking differently about what it means to be human. So there's a sort of real mix of paradoxes in there, isn't there?
There is a lot. But I mean, I agree with you. And I think that what we call whole intelligence, which is this notion that a very kind of commonsensical almost approach to thinking about human competence and wisdom ability to understand things. Um, that I think there has been and is being a slow emergence of more whole intelligence. I don't think we can claim any particular credit for that, but because we're just sort of naming something, but there is more understanding. So that, for instance, if I talk about the 5 dimensions briefly, I mean, the fact of the matter is that as much as we take war and the incredible awfulness of it, nevertheless, there is more anti-war feeling probably now in the world than there's ever been. More understanding of the injuries, more understanding of the intergenerational trauma, more understanding of what happens when you go to war, that you just create the conditions for the next one, which is in the way what Israel's doing at the moment. I mean, and the Palestinians, I don't want to be too one-sided, but nevertheless, ultimately, war has to be understood as an aberration, as a human act of stupidity. And arguably, the issue of the Palestinians and the Israelis living in the same land, physically speaking, this was a situation which was not responded to creatively for decades. And so here we are so I've talked about the relationship, the lack of relating in war, or the perverted form of relating,
Yes,
killing one another.
Yes, almost the inhumane, i.e., you don't treat the other as a human.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The dehumanizing massively and objectifying it's terrible. So the interrelating is all, which is part of whole intelligence training, if you like, is about building understanding, listening to the other, recognizing that the other person or the other group or whatever have themselves views or ways of being which feel right to them. So you have to respect difference, massive respect for difference, and a recognition that we're not always right in when we compare ourselves with other people. So, but anyway, that's a whole area. The other one is responding to the situation. Is that, in a sense, this problem has been internationally swept under the carpet. That here we have two groups of people living in the same area, and the whole basis of that is an inadequate, in a sense, stupid waste of energy, and that there needed to have been people working on this full time with everyone involved around the table with international support for Palestine and Israel to sort this out. But you can only do that. Then we come into the third realm, which is around self-recognizing. You can only do it if people recognize that they are potentially prejudiced, ignorant, don't look at the history, don't want to look at the reality of the situation. So there has to be some willingness to look at oneself and what one does, whether it's personal or group. And people have to acknowledge that they have feelings, and when they have feelings, their thinking processes are affected.
Yes.
So that you can't feel without thinking, and you can't think without feeling. I mean, the two are bound together and not kept apart. So there has to be a wish, a feeling of wanting to connect, wanting to be equal, wanting to respect, wanting to be respected. And these are commonly held feelings across these huge divides.
Yeah.
And then the last one, since I've run through the others, is to experiment, unless countries, groups, institutions, and individual people are prepared to do something unfamiliar, to break out of their trapped ways of thinking and ways of being, their habitual patterns, then they can't experiment. So that experimenting, self-recognizing, relating together, acknowledging the embodied nature, the feeling, our feelings and our emotions inevitably come in. All of this is necessary if we're to relate together sensibly and amicably and respond to the incredible demands and challenges of our time.
That's
Sorry,
fascinating.
I've gone on a bit there, but I think it's important just to lay it out.
No, I think it's helpful actually, and I'm thinking about the conversations we've had recently in the whole intelligence group, where we've been talking about the order of almost the order of the elements of whole intelligence, and at the same time the fact that they all need to be in play at the same time for them to have the power that they have. I think what I'm thinking about is your comment about where responding to the situation comes. Yeah, because I found that really interesting in the sense that having the elements of whole intelligence at play at the same time has such a big impact on how we respond to a situation. You know, if we're not acknowledging them, working with them, aware of them, then we're almost blind aren't we, in terms of how we respond to the situation. So it's I think that's quite interesting. But what thoughts do you have about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to underline the fact that there are 5 different ways into whole intelligence, and they're all necessary. And you can't just do some and ignore others. So that the people who say, sit down and say, well, we're going to do better interrelating together, if they try and do that without expressing their feelings or acknowledging their feelings and their emotions and so on, the thing will go pear-shaped. Because actually, if somebody's sitting there trying to make polite conversation and actually underneath feeling completely demolished or unseen by the other, that is going to affect the quality of the exchange. You know, they all complement one another. They all are necessary for the others to emerge.
Yes.
People have got to be able to recognize their own patterns of defensiveness or aggressiveness towards others, which are probably trauma-based and part of investigating their lives or investigating the life of a group. Again, there are history that has to be understood. That's all part of having a whole vision, a holistic vision of what's necessary to repair the damage, the tear in the fabric in the past, or the shock or the trauma or whatever it is, in order to be able to grow up a bit. We're talking about being grown up in a more substantial way than just the passage of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what comes up for me with that is the in some ways the complexity of it. And what I mean by that is that I appreciate whole intelligence and work with it on a daily basis. I'm conscious of it, and therefore hopefully I'm responding to situations in a way that is wholly intelligent. And at the same time, I also recognize the impact my history has, you know, the mindset that I have, and the lineage almost that goes through families and all those sort of complex interactions that influence who we are. So how do you approach that then from a whole intelligence perspective, appreciating that there is, even for one human like me, there's a whole lot of complexity that influences how I show up each day?
Yes. And I mean, you're acting in a completely wholly intelligent way in recognizing that,
Mm,
because it's the same for everybody.
mm,
Everybody carries their past, the intergenerational uh, ripples from things that happened a long time ago with different people alive and so on. But nevertheless, we're built from our past experiences. Um, Certainly in our own lives, and quite often intergenerationally from the lives of others.
mm.
And so that has to be examined. You know, if we're to be responsible adults, we've got to take some interest in that. It's no
Yes.
good saying, "Oh, I don't want to look at myself," or "I can't see the point of digging over the past," or whatever.
Mm,
That's naive, and it
mm,
leads to people not uh, going through the process that you are
mm,
describing,
mm,
about acknowledging that we are all damaged or affected in some way or other,
mm,
limited in some ways,
mm.
and advantaged in certain ways.
Yes.
And it is complicated. You're absolutely right. It's incredibly complicated because some of the things that are most damaging to our self-confidence or whatever, to our well-being, um, that we may have inherited or that we got through funny educational pressures or whatever,
Mm,
or through huge losses in our lives, these can also be turned into strengths. Our fault lines are also the lines where we can develop more
mm.
through applying ourselves, through being interested in these things.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
like it is very, very complicated, but we can't dodge that complexity
Mm.
with in silly, naive ways.
Yes.
And that's the key thing about self-recognizing is to do with waking up to who we are
Mm.
and what we are and how we operate. And then there's choice.
Yes.
We can choose to do something different, or we can choose to stay in our rut and just do what we always did, not talk about so and so because somebody might be upset, say.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And and I what I find interesting about that is that thinking back to key moments in my life. So my dad passed away 18 months ago, and what that does is it brings everything really to the present, doesn't it? Very clear, and you have to deal with it. You have to respond to the situation, and the feelings are visceral. You can't escape
yeah,
them. You're
yeah, of
reflecting on
course.
his life and you're reflecting on I was reflecting on our relation. I'm thinking back now, but reflecting on our relationship. How am I responding to the fact he's passed away, and how we deal with that? How would he want us to deal with that?
Yeah,
Experimenting. I've never done it. I've never
yeah,
done it before. So it's the reason I mention that is because it came up in my mind when we were talking, and and linking it to your point at the start around the existential threats we have and war. It's almost like we have the opportunity to be wholly intelligent, and yet because the threats are sort of out there somewhere, you know, it's either somebody else's problem or it's not at my front door, like you know,
mm-hmm.
death can be. Not for us
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's for other people. But we don't
Massively, yeah.
we don't adopt it. And so I guess it's in some ways it's that frustration that the tools are at hand, aren't they, with whole
Yeah.
intelligence, and yet we choose not to use them, or we're not aware of them, and so therefore we can't, I guess.
Well, this is why I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are tools at hand. It's a very good way to describe them. They are fundamental aspects of human life and human living well that are rooted, actually, a lot of them in spiritual traditions, but in wisdom learnings, wisdom teachings of every generation. They're to do with our relations with others, our understanding of knowing ourselves. Know thyself was one of the great laws of know thyself, and then using our creativity.
Mm,
The way that the arts and the use of the imagination, we can begin to create alternative ways that are better or more beautiful or more appealing to other people. So there's a whole, that's another whole tradition, a whole way of being, which is around experimenting, going, inventing things, going further. We've got to be able to do that, because the way that our society and our economy and everything else is organized is not doing that. It's stuck in a rut, and that will never work. We've got to reinvent what it means to be a human being alive today. And we've got to invent new societies and it's formidably difficult. But we haven't even got a hope in hell's chance unless we pay attention to these different fundamental skill sets that we're talking about, and what whole intelligence summarizes and encapsulates in a easy to grasp framework of understanding.
And I do wonder, you mentioned there sort of culture, art, and music, and I wonder, in many ways, the difference between the experience of relaxing, listening to your favorite music, or seeing art that really makes you feel different. You know, those experiences in many ways are quite represent whole intelligence, I think, don't they? Or they can do if they have that effect on you, because you sort of you feel different about it. Maybe it forces some reflect. Maybe you heard the music in the past, you know, and it brings up memories. We had a quiz, like a little quiz, family quiz over Easter, and they said, "All right, go on. You were born in the 70s, Darren. Let's start with the 80s, you know." And what was amazing is I could remember all the tunes that were coming through. I even was amazed myself. You know, I could feel it. I could feel the sort of, God, it was taking me right back to the sort of school discos, and I was reflecting on what I was like, and you know, how I was sort of new mates and the sort of relationships we had, and so I guess where I've gone with that is, and I can feel it actually thinking about it now. But I guess
you're embodying your point.
Yeah, and it makes me smile as well. I mean, the music in the 80s was awesome, isn't it? So I think it was anyway. But I guess my point is that in many ways, I guess thinking about sort of maybe politics and business organizations, they can be places that don't, you know, they don't sort of bring that experience up for many people. You know, it's more sort of focused on the bottom line, or we've got to get to this position of growth, or you know, and then so how do those things sort of influence each other? So
what happens when that is true, that people are focused completely on the profits or the throughput, you know, the performance indicators, they stop, they lose some of their humanity. And in the losing of their humanity, they're also, in a sense, depriving themselves of some of the skill sets that they need. You know, so that, in fact, music is a wonderful healing thing, and it brings people together if they sing or dance. You know, it's both creative, so it's experimental, it's inventing things, and each time you play something, it comes out slightly differently. And, you know, so there's tremendous things there, but it also builds relationships. So it's a tremendous force for good, I think.
Yeah.
And yes, it does connect us with the past. It connects us with the reality that we are made from our previous experience. You know, we honor experience in many ways. We sort of say, "Oh, this person's got real experience. They're capable because they've got experience." That means that they have actually got access to a much broader range of life events and ways of being and perceiving and thinking and acting as a basis for what they need to do in the present. So experimenting requires people with experience as well. It's not just new and
Mhm.
forget about the past. We're 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 we are already um, formed out of our past experience and epigenetically, as we were saying earlier.
So what I'm just conscious of where my mind goes with this, but what have you noticed with the people that you've worked with that helps them to start to become more conscious of their whole intelligence and become more
Mm.
um, fluent in the use of it?
Yeah. What do I notice? Well, you mean we can. It's pretty straightforward, actually, to create circumstances where naturally people learn and pick up on whole intelligence. We have to start with respecting them as unique beings,
Mhm.
not as data, not as people that have to be, just treated in some automatic fashion, but recognizing them as human beings
Mhm.
makes an enormous change instantly.
Mhm.
So people feel more trusted if they are treated well.
Mhm.
So that's simple increase of whole intelligence just there in
Mhm.
that first thing.
Mhm.
And then some of the others follow. I mean, being interested in not only, what are they doing coming to this meeting or consulting or whatever, what are they doing? And part of it is also what they're feeling. Are they relaxed or are they all tensed up and just with a sort of automatic grin or are they filled with tearfulness which they're not expressing
Mhm.
or not, and then they don't have the conditions under which they feel safe to express their tearfulness or their sadness or their concern. So you had to kind of create the conditions, the
Mhm.
field as we call it, the field of inquiry that is truly supportive of people being real
Mhm.
and open to what's arising in them.
Yes.
And lo and behold, if people start doing that, they become uh, more self-recognizing. They recognize that, oh, I was feeling really miserable when I came in, but now I'm feeling a bit more like living,
Mhm.
like carrying on living.
Yes.
Um, so and well, would you like to do so and so? You invite them into an experiment,
Mhm.
and they might say, no, whoa, I'm not sure about that. Okay, so you honor that. That's
Mhm.
where they're at. But then a little bit later, maybe they say, well, maybe I will try it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they have to kind of get themselves up for that a little bit, take a deep breath,
Mhm.
support themselves to be able to take that little risk to do something different from what they might otherwise have done automatically.
Mhm.
Um, and and they become more flexible about trying things out and doing things, and so it's a cumulative process, but it's
Mhm.
not difficult to get it going.
Yes.
What
Mhm.
makes it difficult is when people operate in an automatic, maybe formalized or administrative fashion where they don't recognize who they're dealing with as a human being,
Mhm.
but as a competitor or as an enemy, even.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking about my experience of going up to Canary Wharf yesterday. I mean, it's an amazing place and at the same time quite dystopian. It's all concrete and glass, and people are there's not much human interaction. People are all going somewhere. I noticed. I was just watching people,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
and I think that's it. The way you're describing, I almost feel like it's a way of us remembering how to communicate with each other, rather
Yeah,
than almost
yeah,
rather than habitually conforming to the sort of rules almost of the
that's right.
organization. And also, the
Mm.
other thing that comes up for me is not becoming um caught up in the whole woke thing. It's understanding where someone is coming from, like you said, you know, I mean, it's always amazing to me when somebody you start a meeting, maybe it's on a Zoom call, and we go through our habitual routines. Though, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. And you say, you see, looking a bit tired. Is everything okay? Yeah, I am feeling. Shoulders go down. I am feeling quite tired. Actually, I'm just like working, you know, for the last 5 days, and it's, you know, it's just that sort of different level of communication, being conscious.
Exactly.
Some people are really good at it, and yet I think we can all say, you know, we're in environments particularly busy and hectic, and many people are these
Yes.
days. It gets
Yes.
lost.
Yes. And we have institutions and an economic system and patterns of relating together formally that require people to keep going despite the fact that they need to stop and breathe and relax and whatever. And they're driven by the system they're in, like the people who work for Amazon, which are notorious. They can't even have time to go and pee.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And almost like that, the notion of boundaries and having the courage to sort of, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess in that sort of situation.
there has to be. There's no chance of whole intelligence operating without there being substantial changes in the way that organizations function and the economy runs and so on. On the other hand, there are now more and more examples of people breaking the rules, doing things in a different way, and lo and behold, they do very well. And the profits go up and so on by treating customers in a more hospitable and helpful way. So I mean, it has to be argued and puzzled over. But what my concern is that unless we emphasize what whole intelligence is, if we don't get these ideas out into the world, we haven't. We're going to be continuing to shoot ourselves collectively in the feet.
Yeah.
It's more than common sense. It's in a sense it's uncommon sense, but it could be common sense.
Yes. It's, do you know what I find fascinating about that, Mike, is a chap I used to work for when I was in the army, actually. He was responsible for our unit, an amazing guy, you know, but actually really quite modest. And he passed away recently. He just retired literally last year, and he was trekking with his sons, and he passed away. And God, the outpouring of grief for him, and nobody's surprised because he for me, he's the kind of guy that he exudes whole intelligence. You know, he always had enough time for people. He treated everybody differently. You know, he was quite in touch with how he was thinking about things. He always responded to the situation. I noticed when I worked with him in a way that was appropriate. You know, and but he wasn't afraid to buck the system. That was the other thing. You know,
Right.
even if it was, you know, military's quite a structured system, so it is out there, isn't it? And we know it when we see it or experience it.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's really the hope for humankind, because people do recognize whole intelligence when they see it.
Yeah.
Their eyes light up. They feel more on solid ground. They it's a good blood or whatever. The, the language is different, but people do recognize.
Yeah. I'm just noticing your connection's going a bit there. So we'll probably need to
Yeah,
come to a
it
close.
probably needs to stop anyway. We've been
Yes,
going a while.
getting too interesting.
Yeah, yeah, really getting down to the brass tacks.
But oh, thank you for that, Malcolm. I really enjoyed that. I feel there's also themes that we can work on in other conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always good to raise difficult things because this is not a perfect system. I mean, it's provisional. It's experimental. It's we're trying to respond to the situation at the same time as relating together and staying in touch with our totality rather than just playing around with empty ideas.
Mm.
We want to embody them.
Yeah.
So we're trying to live it as well as articulate it.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm really enjoying this and enjoying you and enjoying our dance together.
Mm. Very much.
So shall we stop at that point?
Yep.